stuff.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. I can see the enthusiasm, and this is the Africa we want. I'm happy to be here, and in a couple of 7 minutes, we're going to start by our German time. Yes, if you're joining the show, please just click the link and share, because we are not going to build the Africa without the people. We are not going to be that kind of conservative Africa, where people take decisions without consultations. The difference about this platform is that it is the voices of the people. And so I'm very happy to have you here, and I'll be with you in 2 minutes. I have my water with me. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of impressions, and be aware the topic today is, why am I proud as an African? And we had a lot of reactions coming in, questions, motivation, speeches, quotations, and how the world and Africans on the continent are seeing the future they want to build for themselves. So I'm happy to have you here on this program, because my voice, your voice, we build the Africa we want. Yes. Thank you for coming. And if you come in, just sign in and click the link and share. You know definitely somebody that is interested in building the Africa that we want. It doesn't matter whether it's an African, whether it's a white person, whether it's a non-African. We want to build a continent where the doors are open, but the continent that Africans define the rule and set the pace of this continent. Today, while we'll be talking about why am I proud to be an African, we're going to be seeing the reactions of how people Africans see how this continent is supposed to be now and in the future. So welcome and join in. I'll take a short break. In 5 minutes, I'll be right back. Thank you. Good. Here we are. And like I said, let me start by welcoming you. I think my camera person is giving me some indications that I am too further away from the camera or too near. Yes, I mean, let me first of all thank the team that is putting this show on tonight. Before I go on to welcome us, we have a long way to go. You all know it. So relax and keep the pace. Yes, relax. It's exactly 6 p.m. in Germany. And in Germany, time is money. So we're going to hit right now and go straight into the topic. Why am I proud as an African? Why am I proud like an African? Be aware of the fact that it's not I as Susan Tata, it's why are you as an African proud to be an African? Why and what are the things that make us proud to be an African? So these are the talks that we'll be talking about today. These are the conversations that we'll be having, and we'll be taking, or I'll be sharing reactions from people that are writing to us and asking questions and actually motivating, us, because that's the objective. That's the principal objective of this program, the Africa I want, or the Africa you want, but the Africa we want, the voices of the African people. Yes, so I would go straight into the presentation of the first writer. I mean, he actually touched some facts that I thought this should be the main presentation, and then we would start sharing impressions from other people from the continent, from the diaspora, from the US, and even right up to the Dubais. Yes, this is the Africa we want to build, because we've had enough. Everything we know about Africa has been told to us, has been taught to us, has been brought to us, has been preached to us. But what do we Africans think about Africa? I said it in the last presentations. What are our own narratives as Africans about Africa? Because those are the issues we'll be dealing about for us to be able to get the Africa that you and me, we want. And so depicting, knowing where we're coming from and where we are right now and where we're going to is giving us the big picture of the Africa that we want to build. Yes. Let me take 1 minute and just thank all the people of Africa that have lost their lives in the quest for looking for the freedom of Africa. I mean, we start talking about even our alma maters when we look into history. What was Kwame Nkrumah, this son of Ghana, talking about? Pan-Africanism. What was he talking about? Why was he so proud to talk about the Africa that is one? These are some of the things that we're going to be able to analyze for us to know how or what makes us as proud Africans. First, on the presentation today, this message dropped on my desk this morning, and it is from Liberia. I'm going to read with all the pride that I have, and then we share the opinion or we give our impressions about it, because exactly this is the motivation that we need to be able to own our continent when people are expressing their views. Because right now, I said it in the first show, we spend time defending the narratives of the continent rather than building one. We spend time justifying narratives about us rather than enjoying the Africa. And now Africans are taking the responsibility into their hands to be able to define how the future of Africa is going to look like, and even the present. And so you and me, we have a lot on our table. I said it already, it's a long journey. We're only just starting to think before we start implementing. But at least we're starting from somewhere. At least we have to start. Somebody has to start it, and it is you and me. So I just want to take a minute, like I said, because there are a lot of people that have actually, lost their lives in the quest for freedom. In our home countries, we see the past conflicts and how people lost their lives. I mean, in times of even Nelson Mandela, who had to spend all these times. Those are the past visionaries. But we're talking about today. But we see how all these visionaries had shaped the path that we should be able to continue from this moment and today on. I mean, when we look at the new generation today of Africans, I mean, we're talking about some young African guy or young son of Africa like Akon. Akon in 2014 launched a project with renewable energy that supplied light to 18 villages. I mean, this is enormous. And then when we go about and we look at, even right now, we look at somebody like the Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia being a Nobel Prize winner. I mean, we're talking about the present right now, what is going on the continent. And we've also been seeing agitations from the reactions of even, black brothers or Africans that just passed away, like our superstar Kobe Bryant, how the continent is reacting to such figures that they've been looking forward to. And so these are a lot of stories that we should be talking about. These are the visionaries of today, of now, of this time, that we should be in line with. Now we have new visionaries. We have Professor Pierre-O Lumumba, who is one of my mentors. And we keep hearing, and we keep following, and we keep seeing the change going on the continent. And so there is no reason why we're going to stand still and be thinking only about the past. The past is there to remind us on how to follow our path forward. Don't get me wrong, we cannot jump past this history. No way. There's never going to be a day that we're not going to talk about, address issues of, slavery. Because like Fungot Stanley, the creator of Renaissance, I'll be sharing his story coming up very soon, and how he explained the first ship that left the coast of Africa with 20 black people. And that was the thing, 1916, and landed at the coast of Angola. And that ship that carried those 20 Africans is what has determined the slave history of more than 4 decades. This we cannot ignore. And today, but we are confident, and we are seeing countries like Ghana opening up its doors, for the returnees. I mean, imagine if all African countries, or we say Africa is one, and I would have to justify that fact, that we are one country. We are one country. And so if Ghana already opens up a program for the returnees, just telling our brothers that were out there, that came up from this slavery background in the Caribbean, in the Americas, to say, daughter and son, you are welcome home. What does that mean for you and me? It means that, as a matter of fact, Africa is one country. And these are examples that we begin to shape the narratives of the continent, because it doesn't matter whether it's your own home country of origin. What matters to us right now is that the continent is open for all its citizens and all its people. So Africa is one. Yes, Africa is one, because even when we go back to the history, if only, my people, if only for once, during the Berlin Conference, Africans' opinions were sorted. I believe the original map of Africa was one, and you and me, we know it. Now we have the new map of Africa that is like a piece of cake that has been chopped off, and we start seeing and say we have 54 or 55 countries of Africa. No, we are one. Africa. We are one. And until we start removing all these boundaries in our mind, and these are the boundaries that are causing us the conflict, for God's sake. You know, these are the boundaries that people just sat, that Europeans sat in my capital city in Germany and decided to partition, you know, Africa according to their needs without the opinion of Africans. And if we take into our common, you know, culture, we realize that the problem, I'm sorry, I'm getting indications from my studio. And so, if we take into consideration these geographical settings, the geopolitical Africa, and we're going to see that we are 54 countries, it's going to be difficult for us to think as one people. And that's why we're getting a lot of these conflicts that are going on the continent. So what is happening is we should be able to start to build the Africa we want by shaping the narratives. We are one Africa. We are one continent, because history has proven to us that they came and they partitioned us. So the fact that they partitioned us means we were one. We were one. It is simple. We were not 54 countries. We were one country before the partition of Africa. And so, to be able to change and build the Africa that we want, the boundaries have to go off our head. And so I will not only be defending and saying, oh, because I come from East Africa, now we have the East African region. And because I come from West Africa, we have the West African region. These are policies that would take time, my brothers and sisters, for us to be able, you know, to build the Africa that we want. But one thing that we know and we are confident about is that exactly the foreign powers that came to partition Africa, exactly where is how their own countries are existing. And we see that they are chopped off in different countries, but we, as a matter of fact, was one. So my people, I want to take the pains to say that we understand that it's not going to be easy, but we have to start. We already long there. I mean, if I see the energy on the continent, if I see the power that young women are taking their lives to make something out of their lives, this is exactly the Africa that we want. Now, coming to this presentation, this writer from Liberia said, the first thing why I am proud as an African is first my values, our values of Africa. And she writes, we take pride in our culture. We love to preserve, display, and put to exposure our culture whenever, wherever we are. It doesn't matter you are an African, you will feel a sense of belonging. We love to sing, we love to dance, and we have the chance to do all those things. And then she goes on and talks about the natural beauty. She said, Africa natural beauty is unmatched in the world. And she says, Africa is the second largest continent in the world, has landscapes and beautiful and diverse as its animal kingdom. And she says, when I looked from the Table Mountain in South Africa to the Hogger Mountains in Algeria, the beautiful seas and the oceans to the awesome chains of mountains and what have you. I mean, it means we're talking even about Serengeti Park. Where do we want to start from? You know, we're talking about the Rumsikis in North of Cameroon. And she said, from the skeleton coast of Namibia in the south to the Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda, and she put a double 3 points, means endless. The diversity, the food, the wildlife, and our beautiful communal spirit. Exactly, that's the point we're talking about. That's the power, the philosophy of Ubuntu. I am, because you are. It is really difficult to pass a fellow African on the way without knowing how he or she is doing. This is the communal spirit that we as Africans have to be proud about. I mean, talking of whether you are in the diaspora or not in the diaspora, even on the continent, we know, we have seen, we have learned how civilized cultures and other people are behaving when they meet each other, when they relate to each other. But you as an African, me as an African, how do we behave? It is difficult to see an African pass a fellow African by pass without saying, hello, how you doing? How you feeling today? And so this is the Africa that he says, or she says, we have a communal spirit. Good. And then I had another writer or feedback that talked about the history, and this writer sent us his impressions from Morocco, and he said our history. Being an African means being part of a shared history of struggles. Yes, a shared history of struggles. It means we have never had the opportunity to just be on our own and enjoy the Africa. We barely fighting from one situation to the other. It's either the illegal immigrants that are drowning at sea. It's either it's our governments that are not practicing good governance. It's either we are suffering from famine. It's either it's disease. You know, we always have to get confronted with one situation or the other. And as you said, thinking about our past colonization, it makes people think about stereotype and are finally caught up in the tiny boxes of bitterness, disheartedness, feelings of second-class humans with thousands of negative attributes. We know what we're talking about, isn't it? And he said, this is what makes me so amazing, and I laugh because that's the spirit. But I refuse to see the past in this dimension. I refuse to see that past that we keep struggling in this dimension. I decide to build awesome narratives from the broken pieces. Our past is not only about slave trade and colonizations. That is very true. You and me will agree that before this colonial history came, we were a people. How were we living? How were we cohabitating? What is about it that the world wants to tell us about technology? What is it even about that they want to tell us about wealth? Have we remembered, or have we just suddenly forgotten that till today, present day world, the richest man that ever existed on the continent or in the world is an African? It's an African. Do your research. And we know about Mansa Musa from the Empire of Mali till today. But today, even in the Americas or in the world, we see young Africans coming up with high IQs, with discoveries, and even we start getting from black histories, those who discovered, you know, like navigations and powerful women that even discovered technologies like the void, because we had it in the DNA. We had it. It's not just because we say Africa is the cradle of humanity, but it's because from the history, the past, we define the present and we're still in it. And then come to think about the future with all what we know. It's not going to be easy. I tell the world all the time, please be on the wake for Africa, because you'll not be able to contain this Africa that Africans are taking it into their hands to build. And you can already see it. You see how the diaspora is actually agitating regarding their own home policies, how they want to shape the narratives. Like I said, Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, you can name all, Marcus Garvey, you know, all of them, even Paul Kagame, His Excellency. They shape the history, the narratives of this country, of this continent. But you know what? Even you and me, we're shaping it just by being here, just by thinking that we can reflect as one to build the Africa that we want, is already writing the history that would be communicated about us. And mind you, because it's not every African that is African. We know that. But that's another topic for another day. So, another caller, this one he called me and he asked me to write because he wanted to actually get it the way it is. that there's been a lot of misinformation. Yes, the wars, the conflicts that we're having on the continent, but this is what he had to say, and he was writing from Zimbabwe. He said, despite the wars and the conflicts and diseases and famine, I have come to realize that there is still hope. There is still hope, you know. And this is what I copied and I put it in my text that he said, I believe that things will turn around the continent so soon, and it may not be tomorrow, but it is not far from tomorrow. It's already happening. We know about it. Notwithstanding all the negativities about Africa, Africa still remains to be that virgin continent, you know, with more than enough to offer ourselves and the entire world. I mean, this is the philosophy, and we keep asking. I mean, I already said it in the first episode, like, how is it that with all this difficult history, decades of slavery, colonization, exploitation, name it all, the diseases, the hunger, the poverty, the underprivileged, I mean, name everything that you want or the world wants. But what is it? What is that magic point that the world is always putting Africa on top? There is going to be no seminar without Africa that is going to make it interesting. And this is the point we begin to know that this continent is unavoidable. It is so important. But it has always been that. It has been from players to players. And this is the time that African people are taking to build the Africa for themselves. And now we start looking, even in terms of these natural resources that we are having. In terms of our natural resources, these are things we're supposed to be proud about, or that we are proud about, that I am exceptionally proud about. If you look at just the agricultural sector, and we understand, and we're reading about, you know, the statistics on the continent, that 60% of uncultivated land is found on this continent. 60%. And beware of the fact that this is the second largest continent in the world. Even though it reduces to be like a microchip, and it's like, you know, it's like, what do I say, a neighborhood. If you take at just Nigeria, take at just Lagos, and you look at the population and compare it to the United States of America, the growth on the continent is so enormous. And now if you look at the natural resources, and you see that only in terms of agriculture, that 60% of the land mass of Africa is uncultivated. My people, this is enormous. I mean, let's just take only this sector, agriculture, and that all of us are going to invest in it. 60%. You know, that's a whole massive investment that we have to put there for the continent of the people of Africa. And we have these resources. And so, but we're building the dynamics of education. What is the education of the mind telling us? That we are poor, that we're dying of hunger because we don't have the land to farm. Yes, maybe the technology is lacking, but the preambles of what it takes for us to develop is already there, and nobody can take it away from us. Nobody can take it away from you, African. Nobody should take it away from you, because these are the things that we have to hold jealously onto. We have to hold it by our side and say, this is the Africa that I know. This is the Africa that you and me, we belong. Yes, we belong to this continent. It's for us. If they're talking about the narratives that are not corresponding to what we know, it means something is wrong somewhere. But now we know the truth. We know the truth. And they say the truth shall set us free. What is that supposed to mean? We know the truth. And so there is no purpose for us to feel little, for us to feel inferior. We only have to move ahead and ahead. So, like this scholar said, you know, if we look at like the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who is becoming a change agent and has just won the 2019 Nobel Prize. We have a lot of them. Or we look at the first president, Sir Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, the first woman to be elected head of state in Africa through elections, through fair elections, not just elections. And he went about to talk about, role models of our time, like Paul Kagame of His Excellency Paul Kagame of Rwanda, rewriting the history of a country which once witnessed a genocide. Yes. These are the narratives that makes me know. We know the smallest country that is trying to change its narratives. The southern region of Cameroon, they call themselves Ambazonia. They are writing their narratives. And tomorrow, just like Rwanda, you will not be able to believe what is going to happen. And that's history. And so we must build the history. History is not just about, from colonization or slavery. History means all. Forget about that. What about the Nigerians trying to reconstitute the Biafrans? They're coming up to say, we want our autonomy and our right. In those days, for 10 years, this wasn't happening, isn't it? And then we move over even to South Sudan, and we move to other countries that actually had been through a lot to be where they are today, and they're defining this story. And it doesn't end there, and it's going to go further and further and further. It is very, very evident that we as Africans, looking at the past, looking at our values, and looking at our present, we have every absolute right to be proud as an African. And this new wave, because we had never had a period where we start discussing about us, where we start discussing about, with all the potentials on the continent, how we're going to manage these resources, because it is overflowing. And these resources for the same time now, or for some time now, had been put into, let's just say, into the management of just one people. Now the impressions one powerful lady from the African Union wrote last week was talking about how can the diaspora and the people on the continent gain confidence in our leadership anymore. How can the African Union put up a structure that would bring its children at the table and we discuss? And they are looking for the diaspora to give questions to this. But I think it is a beginning. All of us are engaged. All of us are part of it. So it doesn't matter who is doing what in his angle. In as much as you stay on your lane and you're doing what you're doing and you're changing the narratives through your project, through your business, through your whatever, you contribute enormously to the potentials that we already have on the continent. Because like I said, it's overflowing. We just need to start seeing it. Another caller wrote and talked about Africa is not just a travel destination for foreigners or to foreigners. It should be a travel destination to Africans themselves. But today, she's seeing in the diaspora, Africans are posting left and right when they're in the Caribbean, or they are in Dubai, or they are in other places. What about Africa? Because the one thing that this writer wrote was like, I get to think that we are always running from a paradise to look for another paradise. So she suggests we should start by enjoying our own paradise and not leaving the tourism sector of Africa to belong only to foreigners, or like selling the continent only to people when we ourselves, we cannot be able to consume it. And that takes us to the question, like I said before, that we are one continent and we are one without boundaries. But now if you ask yourself, like the question of the day, how many African countries do you as an African know? I mean, just from the landscape. How many countries have you been to? Or in your private time, do you just take your small little time, in a break to just research and like, is this really true that Africa is that poor? Africa is that rich, but its people are poor? I mean, these are the kind of engagement when we start changing this mindset, when we start having conversations like this, then we would be able to change and to build the Africa that we want. So, Before I go to continue with the other impressions, I would like to ask my technician to just give us a short break while I take some water and I collect all the impressions that were coming out so that we can read it out and share with you. And but please don't forget to send your motivation, because like I said, this program is the voices of the African people. It is not going to be like the conservative talk shows that somebody brings, her opinion and wants to teach us. I don't think that we have anything to teach one particular person, but that it's a collective vision for all Africans. It doesn't matter how your status, from which country you are, what background you have. We need the motivation. We need to motivate one another. We need your impressions to be able to build the African we want. We need your stories. We need your comments. We need your critics. We need to criticize one another. For instance, before I jump up on this break, we have the narratives about us that we ourselves propagate about us, like Africans don't support Africans. And I have a comment of one sister who also wrote this opinion, and like, it's like we don't support one another. Black don't support black business. Where is the problem lagging? These are some of the issues that we have to address to be able, to build the Africa we want. I need your voice. You need my voice. We need our voices. Just give your opinion. The only criteria or the way forward that I see is no opinion is wrong. No. Because nobody is here to teach somebody. We're here to learn from one another. And so everybody that is giving her own impressions, we should be able to take it and just add on to it. So now, I'll be back after this break. Thank you. So I'm back, and we're going to go straight into the motivational messages from the continent that just came in, and I'll be sharing it with you. Like I said, it is for us to build the Africa. So send in your messages. We'll be coming on live every Sunday at 6 p.m. German time. So a lot of men have been contributing, but this time I was very impressed to see that women are also getting on board and they're writing their opinion. And this message comes from a lady by name Frida Bime from Cameroon, Yaoundé, and she writes, the African woman has been socialized to believe that marriage is the ultimate achievement. There is nothing wrong with love. I'm sorry, what's going on? There is nothing wrong with love and a good marriage, but it's far from being an ultimate goal. As a woman, the most important thing should be independent, being able to chart one way in life. knowing what you want and going out there to get it. The independence to choose who you want to be, how many children you want, and always have only the number of children you can take care of alone. Be educationally and financially independent, and the world be at your feet, while the sky would not be the limit but the beginning. So thank you, Frida Bime from Cameroon. Thank you for your contribution. And then we also have another suggestion, or that was a remark, and this one comes from Afrobrains. Afrobrains says he is based now in China, and that the situation in China is really getting out of hand. And he says this is also a potential for Africa right now, as now we begin to see that it's not only Africa that can has problems. And this is what he writes. Afrobrain says, some people wrote that Africa is poor and full of hungry people. That's before they discovered diamond valleys and coltan. Coltan, you know, is the substance that is found mostly in Congo, and is the most important piece that we have on our mobile phones and devices. And he says the Africa we want is just a land rich in minerals, but a people rich in knowledge and understanding of our planet. That is the Africa we want, which is an embodiment of the beautifully smooth, dark skin and shiny teeth of the most empathetic and affectionate creations of Mother Nature. Africa is not just a touristic destination. Africa is home to the bravest on the planet. And make no mistake, he said, Africans have come to stay. It's only in Africa that a man sleeps and wakes up in the morning planning to swim across the Atlantic Ocean. And he says, as much as it sounds suicidal and impossible, that's why civilization could only begin from Africa. The Africa we want is a place where communities come together, not just to dance makossa, I guess he's from Cameroon, and baya, or to eat banku, or okra stew, or achu, or yellow soup, whatever, but to dream and contribute their riches to build wealth for the future generations. This is the impression and the message from Afrobrains from China. And he said the situation in China is actually not getting better, and that we should remember that all these aspects are barrier also that affects a whole economy, just like our own Africa is. Now, we also had Stanley Fongard from the United States, who wrote and sent his impressions this morning, and he said, the Africa we want, the voices of the African people. And he said, and when Africans rises to protect their homeland from the continued oppression of a colonial past, it will be that day we all with one voice and like a symphony, shouting from the top of Kilimanjaro to the valleys of Limpopo, from Benin City to Alexandria, that the African is not a byproduct of human civilization, but the originator, the designer, the forerunner of Western civilization. Thank you, Stanley Fongard. Thank you for your, this contribution takes us exactly to where we were and to the Africa that we see, the power in our past, which now defines even our future to where we're going to. So thank you for Stanley. I'm not really going to read all this because we had huge reactions, but permit me just take some other few reactions, because I find these 3 reactions very, very important. And guess what? It's awesome because it's in French, but I have to read them out to you. And Benjamin Pondy wrote, it's in French, and you know, even though the common language is English, but we're going to be switching from French and English because it's a global platform, and our brothers from French-speaking African countries could also, are part of the process. So feel free to write in the language which you think we would read out here. So Benjamin Pondy says, si nous avons décidé de faire le chemin inverse, c'est-à-dire de l'Occident vers l'Afrique, c'est parce que nous avons compris que l'Afrique a un potentiel très fort qui lui prédit un avenir reluisant. Ce potentiel ne pourra être déployé sans les enfants de continent. I mean, from what I understood to the English speakers, it's like, if the African people can still succeed despite all the narratives to cross, from the continent to the west, to the west, yes, and back on the continent, it means we start realizing we have learned through these journeys, because like they say, he who travels learns a lot. Along the way, we have learned through the journeys, and it means we are fit and ready to build the Africa that we want. And now I have a very interesting one from, the famous young category of footballers that we have on the continent at present. And this one is from Mr. Samuel Eto'o. And he sends his contribution. That was last week when I posted. She said, je viens de quartier très modeste. J'ai dû travailler comme un noir pour pouvoir vivre comme un blanc. Après avoir couru dans les stades, j'ai décidé de rendre à l'Afrique ce qu'elle m'a donné. La force, le courage et l'amour pour les autres. Les enfants vulnérables autour de vous, sont vos enfants. Aidez-nous à les aider, même avec une souris. This is what this great talented world icon Mr. Samuel Eto'o sent and said. He grew up in the poorest community, in the poorest and disadvantaged community in Africa, to become the world's best talent and millionaire. And so it doesn't matter how small you are. That is the power of Africa. It doesn't mean that you ought to have been born somewhere else. And he said, getting this kind of fortune and being able to give back to the continent, to look back and put a smile on the face of a child, means truly we are on the right track. What does that mean? It means it's our solidarity, the purpose of which belong, the Africa which we want to build, the icons on the continent giving back. Remember, I mentioned the case of Akon. And Akon, now we know he's having an Akon city. And just from renewable energy, he's going to provide a whole city on its own. These are the kind of role models, my people, that I want us to start looking after the Africa we build. The importance of the potentials of African putting back into this continent, and nobody's saying something about it. No, we should be proud. We should look at this whole beautiful landscape, the culture, the music, even just only the music. If you think this is an irrelevant factor, I am going to tell you we're all wrong. Which type of rhythm and genre is beating the whole world down now? I mean, the top DJs and the artists who tell us Afrobeat. There's no sound that you can sit down to the beat of Afrobeat. Just that one little thing, that talent in Africans, that is able to change the whole narrative. Today everybody's dancing, from Burna Boy to the P Squares to to tell them all, you cannot resist the sound, and that is the power, and that is the value in our culture. It is irresistible. It is irresistible. The dance, the beat, the drums of the dance, and we are going to wipe our tears with the music for the Africa we want. Now, I have another important comment also that came in from the French-speaking Africa, and it's also in French, and this is from one of our very famous artists. It's called Mr. Richard Bona. We all know them, and if you don't know them, doesn't think this is one of the best bassistes in the world that I've come to know. And he wrote, le jour où l'Africain prendra conscience de sa force et de sa puissance, il Il prendra les commandes de ce monde et verra sa qualité de vie s'améliorer. It means the day Africa would recognize their potential and their power and they take it into their hands, that day hunger shall have no place or in Africa. This is the point. The day we shall realize, and I know we've realized it. If not, we will not be discussing on this platform right now. If not, the visions will not come now. If not, the change that we are seeing would not come now. Even the conflicts that are ongoing on our continent is a change. Because it would be funny if a continent is not active in doing something. There must be a change, there must be a transition, and a transition is always having a price to pay. And right now, most of our countries are having tribal wars, they're having neighbor problems. You know, we don't interact with one another, we don't understand. But remember, like I told you, all this comes from this partition that we never created. Because an African man is a social man. If they had sat us at that table in Berlin, and this is the opinion of Milari from Pretoria, South Africa, a student who wrote and said, if an African was invited in Berlin 1884, he would have refused the partition of Africa, and so we would not have had all these indifferences that we are having. And so we come to think about this aspect, that how come that is our map is chopped up into pieces and then begin to separate us from this other prosperous Africa and this non-prosperous Africa and this Africa that is not at peace with itself. No, we are one. And this message, I also had it from the General Consulate of Morocco in Germany, who called during one of our projects in Tübingen and said, Susan Tata, Africa is not a continent with 54 countries. Africa is one continent. And it's time we Africans start thinking of Africa like one continent, as one continent, because that's the original Africa. And if we would want to shape the narratives and to change the Africa, not today, but it's already happening so very soon that you can imagine, we should start thinking first, because it starts from our thinking before we see and before we can communicate. These are the three most important, units of communication and relationship: the eyes, the mouth, and what you see, tangible, And so you find all these characteristics. The ear, what do we hear about Africa? Now, what we hear is what we see, because what we hear translates into our brains to what we then see. And now, what does our mouth talks about what we hear, what we think, and what we speak? My dear people, these are the three units that has changed the whole narratives about Africa. What we hear starts even from our educational system. And this is one of the narratives, or one of the projects that I really find these great people somewhere on the continent trying to put on a structure to redesign the educational concept on the continent. And I told you I'm a part of this project. And this project is going to be oriented on talent-based education. Talent-based education, why? Because we're so talented. Most of us, we go to the universities in our countries and we are not doing what we're supposed to do. We are not following our talent. We just study because we study with the aim to get a job. And now, because the job market gets closer on the continent, now we can get a job, and that's why we see, graduates becoming truck pushers in our countries or becoming that. But take it for 1 minute or an example that this graduate, his talent was actually to be a truck pusher, not even a graduate. And so he could learn those skills. I mean, I think like what we're trying to integrate in this project is like we're looking through the other educational systems of the world, because like I said, we start with what we hear. Every little structure in a system starts from the nursery. In Germany, we see them building block houses, and that's how you can determine if a child is going to be a constructor in future. And we see the ones that, you know, they draw their maps and the colors, whether this one is going to be a visual artist. And that's how they begin to promote that talent, skills, and base of education. And I'm very proud to say that I get in contact with this NGO that is trying to redesign the curriculum, because that's the first aspect that we need to build the Africa that we want. What do we hear? Probably us, we're just carrying the story, but we have to start now redefining that curriculum that is Africa adapted. Because we all realize that being in the diaspora, we didn't even know our history apart from slavery and colonization. I mean, we didn't really know about these potentials about Africa, isn't it? But we studied European history. We studied all famous fishing in Norway, for instance. And imagine a young person on the continent studying fishing in Norway. Same thing like the stories that we read. I mean, you hear what, I mean, this great lady Chimamanda is talking about. I mean, we read stories that in Africa that had snow. But if you ask Africans on the continent if they've ever seen snow, how does it look like? And so we start hearing things that doesn't even exist, that doesn't belong to us. And how do you even want to build something from the skies? And then the next point of this system that is going to transit is what we see. Because exactly the narratives on us is that we're poor. And automatically you see yourself being poor. You heard it, and you see it, the images, they combine the hearing and the visuals, and you start proclaiming it, and you start even defining it, and you start confirming it, and you start saying, oh, you know, Africans don't support one another. Africans don't buy from African businesses. It could be true. But also another idea is Africans should start also redesigning businesses that are African oriented. For instance, if we have two shops and one is being owned by a non-African and the prices and the services are good, then customers or Africans will not just bypassing to buy from an African because they want to promote that business. This is what is in our minds. Because though we are solidarious, we just think that because me being an African, I mean, they have to be appealing. Our strategies have to be appealing. They have to be Africa-oriented and adapted. And so we know that when the services and everything works, and then you buying the products that are coming from Africa and you are selling it, it is. But nevertheless, we still have these issues that we're dealing with and that we'll be correcting from time to time. And that's why I want to thank you so much for being on this program. I'm rounding up, and we are going to see ourselves next week on Sunday. But before I go to that, I would like also to still share, I think if this comment is still online from what we had from Pretoria, I would like to share it. Oh, yes, I get it. The question was, why does it happen that projects from the diaspora, for instance, she really went into the aspect of, Susan, I've been following you on your festival. Why is it taking place in Germany? Because these are projects that are supposed to be on the continent. Because exactly this is what is educational, this is what is motivating, and this is what we identify ourselves. And then she went on to write and said she had been a volunteer on a program because she liked supporting African things, but she realized that these projects were being managed by non-Africans and really with a completely, absolutely different agenda from what it should be, and she was so disappointed. So, Milari from Pretoria, South Africa, I just want to answer your question directly here because that question was directly referred to me in the festival, and I think it's also going to cover all other events that we as the diaspora are doing for the sake of Africa in the diaspora. But one thing I want to assure you is that's already on our agenda, because one thing that we sat down with PLO Lumumba when he came to Tübingen 2019 was how to be able to bring this event on the continent, and we're going to start very soon. So be aware of the fact, and I thank you also for your support to join the team. Like you said, if we need your support or anything, you're going to be there. Let me just also give out a shout out to one volunteer that wrote us from Berlin and was proposing to be on the program. How, when, how, anyhow we need him. He is prepared to offer his sacrifices to support this concept, the Africa we want, like an African. But I'm also giving out a shout out to the Africans, especially the original Africans on the continent. I am more than impressed. I keep saying it. And this is my inspiration. This is my motivation. This is the reason why I started this platform, for us to be able to share. Because what you have on the continent and what you are doing to keep those pieces together, enough respect. Enough respect. And this brings me to another comment that was sent in from, where was that? I think I got that comment today. Okay, from an African that is in India, and said he has a worry that Africans in the diaspora will inherit the Western systems to bring it on the continent, and we'll start again to rebuild, even though we want to build Africa now. Brother, I want to assure you that you are not very wrong from that aspect, but then I think it is also a brain game. It is a brain game. Like I said, while we are readapting our educational structure to be Africa oriented and adapted, just like our businesses, just like our projects, it should be African oriented. It should be also market-based oriented on the economies in our different countries. Until then, we'll have a long way to go. But I think the diaspora is conscious of that, because if you ask the diaspora, how does he feel? Mr. Bernard Bobot asked that question last time. He was just in Cameroon, and he said, Susan Tata, I've been following you, not just because you're an African or you're my sister, for real, but I went to Cameroon, my country, and the feeling that I had, despite the crisis, I was just there for a short period, and you could see the difference when I left at the airport and I landed at my home base in Atlanta. And so this is the same feeling that would not make the diaspora to flinch. That will not change. We can bring the brain gain. We would be able to shape the narratives to adapt to our system in Africa. I can guarantee that, because like myself, with my projects, I didn't change from that structure, and I'm very confident that we will not change from that culture. Yes, we will not. And now, like I said, a lot of us are celebrating all the time, and let me just give another big shout out to Mr. Dan Chico, who celebrated his birthday. Mr. Dan Chico is an origin of Nigeria, but he's also a very contributive person to our projects, and he's been writing all the time to even just find out what next. So brother, enjoy your birthday. We celebrate you. And we also have a Son of Africa also in our region, and just as any other person, if you celebrated your birthday this time, I just want to wish you a happy birthday. If you had new observers, that means if you had new breath coming into your family or your homes, we celebrate you from the bottom of our heart. It's the same thing that during the beginning of this year, most of us lost loved ones. We're not only talking about those that are in conflict zones, that just lost young people or young women or children. We're also talking even in your own private families. We've had to just be like, it's a continent where we just go about now, crying rather than, engaging in our narratives. So I really want to express my heartfelt condolence if you lost somebody in your family. I also did mine. That we are together. That is the spirit. These three aspects is very important. When we celebrate, like the first brother wrote, our cultural values, we dance, and our communal spirit. When we celebrate, we are together. When we cry, we are together. And when we, breathe out the loss, means we're having new children in our homes, and to replace the loss, we celebrate. So I want to wish all of you who have been on this program with me, and I encourage you to drop in your comment, drop in your motivation, drop in your questions, share with one another, so that together we can build this Africa we want. Because it is not me, it is not you, it's all of us. And I really want to also congratulate one lady that has been struggling, and she's also having a show called the Sangi Show, and she's dealing with children with incapabilities, disabilities. And she's been on this program for years, and she's battling to change mindsets of, if you have such a crisis in your home, how do we deal with it? And one last thing, we have realized that we're dealing with a lot of issues, especially women. And we just saw, like I posted an image on the Facebook where a woman was, I'm not sure what actually happened, but it is not about that lady, it is not about even what happened, but it's about the challenges that we are going through and we are not able to share with one another. So I encourage you to learn to open up, to share your opinion exactly on this Africa we want, because until we learn to dialogue, until we learn to open up, then we cannot be able to be strong enough to build the Africa we want. So I want to thank you for being my guest this evening. And I'll be coming live again, like I said, every Sunday, 6 o'clock, except something changes, I will let you know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for all your motivations. Thank you for all your courage. And thank you even for all the likes and sharing. I want to appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. That is the spirit, and this is the Africa we want to build. Summary: why should I be proud as an African? Take into consideration your values. Take into consideration our past that has been very challenging. Take into consideration our present and role models that have been on this journey and that are still being on the journey. And take into consideration that the present is what is going to shape the future. So I wish you a happy time with your families. Thank you for being here, and join me next week, and I'll be back and you'll hear from me. Bye-bye.